I like this one. The solution is there. It's just a matter of having the will to find it. And another one, Israel is starting to realize that they can't continue this policy of occupation and isolation. The U.S. has to be a fair broker in this process, and we can't say that killing and destruction is right for one side and wrong for the other.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, I think that might be a good one to pull out. Yeah, you know, I think when you talk about the specifics there, when you say that, you know, you can't continue this policy of isolation and occupation, if you throw that out there, then you're able to pull off of the Olmert comments.
Yeah.
You're able to put out the, you know, the current political climate in Israel, suggesting that that's not, you know, that there may be a shift from that. And so I think that when you talk about fairness in the process, you know, I think that these are all.
There's another tack that I could take with that, which is to say there's no contradiction between being pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian. Both countries both countries have a right to exist, and we need to recognize that, and we need to make sure that our policy, I don't want to say enforces that. We want to make sure that our policy recognizes that.
Great. You need about 13 seconds to do that.
Yeah.
That's your close.
So that's a good closer in there.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Everybody recognizes that. There are at least two factions in Israel that recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, it's what we see from the Israelis here. We only get the hard right, Likud party, the right wing of Kadima. We don't hear from, you know, the labor side. We don't hear from all of the activist groups within Israel. And what's happening now in Israel? There's a term that I talked about years ago that wasn't known here. It's starting to get a little more known here, but it's a term that's very well known in Israel. And that's demographic time bomb. The problem is that there's more Palestinians than there are Israeli Jews, and the Palestinians reproduce faster, and over time, eventually, there's going to be more of them than there will be Jewish Israelis. And so what the recognition now is that a lot of Palestinians have given up on the idea of a two-state solution, and they're saying, okay, we need a single state. We just need to integrate everything into one state. And this scares the hell out of the Israelis, because if they do that, what that means is that eventually there will be more non-Jews inside Israel than there are Jewish citizens in Israel. And when you hear guys like Ahmadinejad and a lot of people in the Middle East say that they want to see the Middle East or the Jewish state destroyed, they're not talking about guns and bombs anymore. They're talking about demographics. And the Arabs know this, and the Israelis know this, but the American public doesn't know this yet. And so the Israelis are starting to realize in Kadima that if we don't come up with a two-state solution now and give them as much land as possible and get rid of the settlements, 20, 30 years down the road, we're going to be stuck with a situation where Jews will no longer be in charge of Israel. It won't be a Jewish state anymore.
Well, I think, you know, if you get a chance to answer that in long form, presenting that idea might not be a bad thing. But I think, you know,
yeah, I think the one-minute answer was good there. Yeah. And then just the pro. There's no contradiction between pro-Israeli being pro-Palestinian. So.
Okay. Question 6, John.
Mr. Candidate, what do you think is the biggest issue that will affect voters' choices of candidates in this election, and how do you stand on that issue?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on where the individual voter is coming from. I talk to so many people that have different focuses, but the one thing that seems to be on the minds of everybody right now is the economy. And the bottom line on the economy is we can talk about the bailout plan, we can talk about investing in workers, we can talk about healthcare, but what it comes down to is we need a fundamental shift in ideology. We have to get away from this casino capitalism. We have to get away from this every man for himself idea that there's no such thing as a common good in this country. We have to recognize that for individual concerns, the free market enterprise is the best system out there. But for looking after the overall good of the country, government is what we need to look at. Government is the institution that we need for that, and it's time to reinvest in the idea of having a partnership between government and the private sector.
1 minute. Good close. Terrible opening.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
What?
Scratch that entire opening.
Yeah, no, trust me, it was scratched once and then once again. You know, I like the line. We have to get away from this casino capitalism. I think that's a great little term. I'm gonna pull that out and put that down.
Yeah, I like that term.
Especially given what we've seen the last week. I think that the casino fits right in. And then we have to get away from this idea that there's no such thing as the common good. I think this is a great talking point, and you can expand on that through many ways. Now, not only can you use that talking point in terms of the economy, but you can also use it in terms of foreign policy. And I think that's that's a good talking point. And then the partnership between the government and the private sector. I'm just going to write that down as an idea.
And I'll tell you why I had that bad opening. Because what I was going through in my brain was there's two ways that I could go with that. One was to emphasize the foreign policy issues, which is, I think in the long run, I think those have a more immediate effect and a more direct effect on everything than the just directly addressing the economy does. But I know people want to hear about the economy. That's one of those questions when people ask you, what do you think is the most important issue? Depending on the form that someone asks that at, they've already got an issue in mind. They want you to reinforce that issue. They don't want to hear, that you think that, reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act is, your most important priority. They want to know, they want you to reinforce that.
What if they ask you the question of what do you think about the Wall Street bailout? Then could you bring the wars into that?
Well, the thing about the Wall Street bailout is in a minute that's difficult. The war issue does come into it because what happened is it's a cascade effect. It started with the deregulation of the banking industry at the end of the 90s and in 2000, which created, again, this casino capitalism where instead of banks investing in mortgages, banks were selling mortgages off stock and chopping it up. And everybody was making money and the economy was sailing along. And then the invasion of Iraq caused a spike in fuel prices well beyond what would have normally happened in the market. And this slowed down the rest of the economy. And when fuel prices went up, food prices started to go up. And this slowed down everything enough so that instead of having a slowdown in the housing market, from going through a slowdown, we had a real recession in the housing market, which then caused everything to tumble the way that it's tumbled. Instead of having a mild come down, we had a bust, and a lot of it has to do with the war. But that's difficult to put into a minute because that takes some explanation, and that's also debatable. I know a lot of people would argue that point.
Well. Let's move on to question 7 at this point, and then I've got a couple of questions to tack on for the end of this.
Do you have a list, and what would be the order of the issues that would affect this election, and what are your views on these? Top issue.
The top issue, the most immediate concerns are twofold. First is the economy and making sure that the American people have the money that they need to get by, making sure that Washington stops spending money that it doesn't have. And then on top of that, we also need to take care of the foreign policy issue. We need to start negotiating with everybody, and we need to get away from the Bush doctrine of preemptive war and start finding economic and political solutions instead of military solutions. But both of these things ultimately pale in importance to cleaning up the corruption in Washington, changing the way that business is done. Until we change the way that big money politics, until we change the way that big money affects politics, we're going to constantly be chasing after problems and one crisis after another instead of looking forward and finding solutions with real foresight.
Okay, you saved yourself a few seconds.
Which is never a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
So
question.
you get two, and then you spoke about that.
Yeah, that's this question comes
There's
up
no
all the
such
time.
thing
What
as
are your
six.
3 top priorities? You asked me that, I couldn't remember what my 3 were, but my 3 are the economy, the war on terror, and transparency, integrity, and accountability. Those are the 3
in that order,
priorities.
or?
Well, what I like to do is I like to start with I like the order of that I gave.
Mhm.
Start with the economy, segue into foreign policy, and then say, but the most important thing, and close with that. So, because that really is, I mean, that's a long-term thing, but that's the most important issue. That's my top priority.
You're being very positive, and you sound like you know what you're talking about.
Well, it's obviously a good thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about.
Please ask me what newspapers I read.
What newspaper? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, I read all of them.
Yeah. Could you
I
be
get
more
up at
specific?
12:01 and go to sleep at 12 a.m. and I just read every single newspaper article that's out there. In fact, I just took a break from reading newspaper articles to do this interview. As soon as we get done, I'm going back to reading all the newspapers.
Well, I suppose that when you collect the moose droppings that are on the newspaper, you may actually read an article or two by accident. What's your stance on illegal immigration? How do we how do you propose we address that problem? What do we do to stop illegal immigration?
Got time? Got time. When we talk about illegal immigration, we have to recognize first and foremost that there are 2 problems. The first problem is people coming into this country illegally, and then the second problem is illegal employment. We have a supply and demand issue here, and until we address both the demand and the supply, we're going to continue to have this problem. Border security is absolutely important to making sure that we have secure borders, but we don't need walls. Instead of walls, we need better laws. The majority of illegal immigrants in this country didn't come over the border illegally, they overstayed their visa. So we need to make sure that we have a system in place that checks on the visas. Also, we need to make sure that there's a fair system in place that makes sure employers have an accurate database for Social Security numbers that they can draw on, and that they can be held accountable for anybody that they hire.
5 seconds left. Excellent.
Big point. The majority of illegal immigrants didn't cross the border illegally. They overstayed their visas. I think I mean, if you can throw that, if you can beat people to death with facts, I think that's huge.
That came up in the last debate, and all 3 of us. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I think I was the 3rd person to answer that. And I think Saunders was the first person, and he brought that up. And then Neil brought that up and went off on some weird tangent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because that was the question about illegal immigration and terrorism. So.
And then interesting little talking point that obviously you'd have to explain a little bit, but we have a supply and demand issue here. Until we address both supply and demand, we're going to have a problem.
Was that clear when I was saying that we have we have a problem with people coming into the country illegally and illegal employment? 2 separate problems. That's a supply and demand. Was it clear that that's what I meant by the supply and demand?
I don't think that was clear, and I don't think you ever differentiated between the problems of.
So if I said we have not only do we have a supply of people coming in this country illegally, but we have a demand of illegal employment.
I understood you, but yeah, I understood it too. But I think the supply and demand thing kind of clouded the first statement.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So if I use that, I'll make sure that I include that. Say that we have a supply of people coming in this country illegally. We also have a demand for illegal employment, for cheap, easy labor.
And then do you want to make it a point that you separate these problems, that you separate the issue of illegal immigration from illegal employment?
When that question came up in the Cape Coral debate, if I remember correctly, Saunders did make a point of saying that we shouldn't vilify immigrants, and then he went on to add, but there are a lot of people who are doing problems, and we need to make sure that we can lock them up and deport them. This is a good example of him being a good politician. He keyed right in. The big issue now is the cop that got shot in Fort Myers and a couple of other cases where people aren't being deported. So he keyed in on that right away. And then I went with a slightly different tack.
We're ready to move on.
Yeah.
My next question is 1992 political strategist James Carville coined the now much repeated phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." If elected to Congress, what would you do to fix an obviously underperforming economy?
Give me a cue when you got time. There are so many specific things that need to be done for the economy. First and foremost, we need to get away from this idea of casino capitalism and this every man for himself form of capitalism. And we have to recognize that the government does have a legitimate role to play in the economy. I know if I had said this 6 weeks ago, this would have come as an outrage and a shock to a lot of people who are now clamoring for a government bailout. But that's the situation that we have. Number one, we need to make sure that the middle class in this country is taken care of. If the middle class has a decent income, if the middle class has guaranteed benefits, and they're going to have more money to spend on the economy, and that's going to cause growth everywhere. The second thing is we need to make sure that the federal government does not have a deficit that's a drag on the rest of the economy. We need to make sure that we have a strong dollar by getting rid of the deficit, and we need to make sure that our federal debts aren't dragging down the private sector.
You went about 9 seconds over.
Okay.
That's a lot to say.
Yeah. I like you make a lot of good short points. We need to make sure that the middle class in this country is taken care of. The government does have a legitimate role to play in the economy. Like it or not, that's something that people can latch on to. We need to make sure the federal government does not have a deficit. It's a drag on the rest of the economy. And we need to make sure that we have a strong dollar. Now, one talking point I think that we need here is in reference to spending. How would you curb government spending? And I may just throw that out as a question. How would you curb government spending?
There's a number of issues that cause the runaway spending that we have. First and foremost, we need to get away from this notion of America as an empire. We need to dismantle all of these foreign military bases that we're setting up. Nearly 2/3 of the federal budget is currently spent either on the military or on security, and that's not including what we're spending on the Iraq War and some other places, which is adding to the deficit. The second area is we need to change the way that business is done in Washington. We need to have real transparency and real accountability. We need to get rid of these bridges to nowhere. We need to step up against. We need to step out against earmarks and make sure that the legislative process is one that actually represents the needs of the country as a whole, not just a special interest that pay off any particular politician. Good.
You saved 8 seconds. Yeah, give yourself about 2 seconds before you start talking so you can take a breath and come out with a good loud start.
Yeah.
And one thing I would do is watch your little catchphrases. Your first and foremost. If I'm doing you on Saturday Night Live this weekend.
First and foremost.
First and foremost. First and foremost. First and foremost. First and foremost.
That's my version of John McCain's what he doesn't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
So just avoid those. And from what you said, we need to step up against earmarks and make sure the legislative process is actually one that represents the country as a whole, not just one that represents special interests. It's a bit long. I think maybe we can do some trimming there.
One thing I signed in that I want to bring up is the no earmark pledge.
Yeah.
If elected, I've already pledged not to seek any earmarks outside the standard legislative process.
Did you hear him going over that today in Congress? The Senate threw in, I think.
Oh God, I know.
6 earmarks.
This bailout has suddenly gone from $700 billion to about $1 trillion with that Senate package. It's like all these tax cuts and this is with the bailout. The biggest problem with the bailout is what we're doing is we are taking $700 billion from the federal budget to give to banks to buy them back into solvency, so that we can then borrow that $700 billion from those same banks, which is going to create more interest and a higher deficit, and it's going to drag down the value of the dollar. It's going to raise interest rates.
So, my question would then be, from what standpoint do you oppose the bailout? In other words, do you oppose or support the bailout? And if you support it or oppose it, from what standpoint do you come to your decision?
Well, there's no question that the federal government needs to act in this crisis. The problem is the specifics of the way that they're choosing to act. First of all, the idea that we can spend $700 billion to get rid of this bad debt is a slippery one at best. The private sector has yet to figure out how to value these bad mortgages, how to value these bad derivatives. I'm not confident that the federal government is going to be any more capable than they are in that. Secondly, this is essentially a regulatory problem. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to tighten up the regulations, particularly in the derivatives market, which at this point is over $500 trillion. And to put that money and put that number in perspective, in the entire world, all the stocks and bonds are worth $100 trillion, and all the real estate in the world is worth $75 trillion. So until we tighten up the regulations there, we're not going to see any real solutions. In fact, I think that the bailout may actually make things worse by increasing the deficit.
Okay, that's 5 seconds over.
Okay. Paul, has been talking about the monetary system, and he's absolutely right. He's addressed the fundamental problem, but I think his diagnosis is right on, but I think his prescription is a little off. And what I'm starting to recognize now with everything that's happening is the problem is not that we have all of this bad paper in the regular economy, but the fact that we have this huge underground black market economy of derivatives, which has by far outshadowed everything else in the global economy. And so what we have is this sort of shadow banking system, which is nothing but bad paper. And I think more than anything, a lot of the problems which people from the Ron Paul side of things have diagnosed as being part of the going off the gold standard, I think it's more recent than that. I think it's the fact that we created this big, huge derivative market. And that I want to get that 500 trillion number out as much as possible. The 500 trillion, we have over $500 trillion in derivatives. And to put that number into some perspective, the entire real estate market in the whole world is worth 75 million, and all of the stocks and bonds, 75 trillion, and all of the stocks and bonds in the world are worth 100 trillion. And we have $500 trillion in derivatives, unregulated derivatives.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. This is
Unregulated derivatives.
unregulated.
in the world.
And the reason why the derivative market has exploded in the last 8 years is precisely because of that. They took all the regulation off of it. And so, I mean, derivatives have been around as long as there's been an economy. Basically what a derivative is you buy, you fix a price onto something, and then that price is fixed to a specific event, and then basically you have an option when that event or when that time date comes of buying or selling at that price. So, for example, if you buy, if you buy stock at a company for $50, you have the option of at such and such a date selling that stock for $50 or buying more at $50. And if the price goes up, then you can buy more at that price and you make money. And if the price goes down, you can sell and still make money. But what happens is, so there's a third party that comes into it, which is called swaps, which is what AIG did. When AIG collapsed, this was the signal to everybody in the market that this is where the problem was. Because AIG did something, they were one of the largest insurers of the world of what are called swaps. Basically what a swap is an insurance that you put against a derivative. So like, for example, if you loan somebody money, if a derivative goes out as a loan, you either get paid back all of the loan or you get the insurance for a partial value of the loan. And AIG was providing swaps for all these bad real estate deals, and now nobody knows how much any of it's worth, and so the whole swaps market is basically worthless because nobody understands, what's the correct rate to insure this at, how much should I sell it for, how much is it worth buying for, and so there's nothing but paper, nothing but bad paper, and everything is deregulated. The whole market's deregulated, so there's no accounting requirements other than what individual companies have. There's no federal reporting requirements, and it's basically, for all intents and purposes, depending on how you do it, tax-free. So everybody put everything in derivatives, but they're so complicated, and it's a big Ponzi scheme. That's all it is.
Can I ask a question about something that I've been thinking about? Because the company I worked for in North Carolina before I came down here, every year they went to the bank and borrowed money to set up their manufacturing, in which their season was Christmas. Mm-hmm. They strived to have other things to sell during the year, but Christmas always was the dog that wagged the tail, right, or vice versa. So they always went to the bank and borrowed the money to spool up, and then when they got to the end of the season, all their money came in, they could pay it back, and then they had a profit, and they siphoned that profit off the company and took it to owners' private businesses and holdings, and then left the company itself with the employees and the executives who were supposed to get a bonus and this kind of thing out of it, left them all out there in the dark again, and next year they go back and they borrow money again. Okay, so they borrow from the bank, and then the owners drain the company by renting the machinery and renting the building and supplying all the goods, that they processed, right, converted. And
that's the modern American business model, unfortunately, and that's one of the things that's got to change. Because people, a term that you'll hear from people who defend these sort of business practices, high-powered executives, high-paid individuals, is that it's wealth distribution. If you take the money that they're earning from that process and give it back to the people who are working somehow, yet the fact that the employees are working for next to nothing and that the executives are reaping all the profits, and the shareholders, not even the shareholders, but the heads of the holding companies or the owners of the holding companies are making all of those profits, somehow that doesn't enter their mind as wealth distribution. But that's exactly what it is. The fact of the matter is that we've got to get back to the idea that the American worker is actually worth something. That the American worker should be making a salary, should be making a living wage, should be making a respectable salary. Because at the moment, we have one of the highest divides between executive compensation and employee salary anywhere in the world. At the moment, it's somewhere around 400 times what the average floor employee makes. An executive makes 400 times what a floor employee makes in this country, and that is by far. I think the next closest country to us is Mexico, where an executive makes 40 times what a floor employee makes. Or you can look at the European model in Germany, it's about 10 or 12 times what a floor employee makes. And this is what's got to change. This is where all our money's going. This is why nobody has any money to spend, because we've been working on this model of debt. Instead of paying people a decent wage, everybody's been living beyond their means by charging everything on credit. And this is the model in the business sector. This is the model for individual households, and this is the model for the government. Everything is built on debt, and until we get rid of that model, we're going to continue to go from one crisis to the next. This is my main problem with the bailout, is all we're doing is we're getting rid of debt in one sector and creating even more debt in another sector. It's not going to solve anything.
It's usually based on...
Now, this is where we talk about casino capitalism. This is the problem, is that people don't invest in companies. People just stick their money wherever it's going to make the most money, and then as soon as there's even the slightest downturn in that company, they take their money and put it elsewhere. If there was a tax on transactions, it would actually force people to think a little bit more about what they're investing in, and it would give them more incentive to leave their money in companies that might be having a bad quarter, but their long-term forecast looks good. Instead of everything being based on these quarterly reports, where oh, you had a down quarter, I'm pulling my money and putting it somewhere else. If there was a tax there, not only would it create revenue for the government, but more importantly, it would slow down speculation in the market.
People's not